siren in the woods. Sarah had built her reputation by going where most people refused to go. As a solo travel YouTuber, she spent years exploring abandoned towns, forgotten roads, and remote wilderness areas across America. Her audience loved her fearless attitude and calm personality. No matter how strange the location, Sarah always seemed comfortable being alone. That confidence was exactly why she chose the forests of Oklahoma. The plan was simple: spend one night deep in the wilderness, document the experience, and capture the beauty of nature far away from civilization. When she arrived that afternoon, everything felt perfect. Sunlight filtered through towering trees, painting the forest floor in golden patterns. The air was warm, the sky was clear, and the only sounds came from birds hidden among the branches. With her camera recording, Sarah smiled. This might be one of the most peaceful places I've ever camped. For several hours it seemed true, but around sunset, something changed. Dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. The wind picked up unexpectedly, carrying a chill that felt unnatural for the season. Tree branches swayed overhead, producing long creaking sounds that echoed through the forest. Sarah noticed the shift but wasn't concerned. Weather changed quickly in Oklahoma. She had experienced worse conditions before. As darkness settled across the forest, she continued filming. Then midnight arrived, and the woods went silent. Not quieter, silent. The insects stopped, the birds disappeared, even the wind seemed to vanish. Sarah sat outside her tent, immediately aware that something was wrong. The silence felt heavy, oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Then it came. A sound erupted somewhere beyond the trees, a metallic scream, long, mechanical, unnaturally loud. The noise echoed across the wilderness like a warning meant for something hidden in the darkness. Sarah froze. The sound continued for several seconds before fading away. Then silence returned. Her heartbeat accelerated. She grabbed her camera and scanned the darkness. Nothing. No lights, no movement, no explanation. Minutes later, the sound returned. This time it felt closer. The horrifying alarm pierced through the forest, vibrating through the air and into her chest. Sarah's imagination immediately began filling the gaps. An industrial accident, a chemical leak, a prison escape, some kind of emergency she wasn't supposed to be near. The human brain hates uncertainty, and when answers are missing, fear creates its own. By the third blast, panic had taken control. Sarah abandoned her campsite. Throwing her equipment into her vehicle, she started the engine and drove into the darkness. The narrow forest roads seemed endless. Her headlights illuminated twisted trees that appeared almost human as they emerged from the darkness and vanished behind her. The siren continued intermittently, always distant, always impossible to locate. After nearly 20 minutes of driving, she noticed something unusual. A faint light, far ahead between the trees. Relief washed over her. Any sign of civilization felt comforting. She turned toward it. The deeper she traveled, the stranger the atmosphere became. The forest seemed unnaturally empty. The darkness beyond her flashlight beam looked endless. Every shadow felt alive. Every movement of the trees triggered another wave of anxiety. Eventually, she reached the source of the light and stopped. It was a public restroom, standing completely alone in the middle of nowhere. No campground, no visitors, no vehicles. Just a single concrete building illuminated by one flickering exterior lamp. Sarah stared at it. The isolation made no sense, yet it was the only shelter available. Taking her flashlight, she stepped inside. The building was empty, clean, silent. She locked herself in one of the stalls and finally allowed herself to breathe. Outside, the siren echoed once again. The sound felt different now, more haunting, as though it was searching for something. Sarah pulled out her phone. There was barely enough signal to connect. Hands shaking, she searched for emergency alerts. A notification appeared instantly, tornado warning. She blinked. Read it again, then a third time. The terrifying sound wasn't mysterious at all. It was a tornado siren, a standard warning system used throughout Oklahoma. The realization should have brought comfort. Instead, it created a different kind of fear. Because although the mystery was solved, her body refused to believe it. Her pulse remained elevated. Every distant noise still sounded threatening. Every creak from the building made her jump. The danger outside had become less frightening than the danger inside her own mind. For the rest of the night, Sarah sat alone in that restroom, listening, waiting, imagining. The storm never arrived, no tornado appeared, no disaster unfolded, yet the hours felt endless, because fear doesn't always require a monster. Sometimes it only requires uncertainty. Sometimes the most terrifying thing in the darkness is the story your mind creates when it doesn't know the truth. When dawn finally broke, pale sunlight filtered through the trees. The forest looked ordinary again. Birds returned, the wind softened, the nightmare atmosphere disappeared with the darkness. Exhausted but unharmed, Sarah stepped outside. Looking back at the forest, she realized something important. Nature hadn't been the source of her terror. The siren hadn't been the source either. The real horror came from her own imagination, an invisible force capable of transforming a simple warning signal into something far more terrifying. As she drove away, she knew she would never forget that night, not because of what happened, but because of what she believed was happening. And sometimes, those are the scariest stories of all. The story follows Emily Carter, a popular solo female travel vlogger in her early 30s, who is known for exploring remote wilderness locations across America. Her audience admires her courage and independence. She has spent years traveling alone and prides herself on remaining calm under pressure. The story begins on a beautiful autumn afternoon in Black Hills National Forest, South Dakota. Emily arrives at a remote section of the forest after several hours of driving. The landscape is breathtaking. Golden leaves drift through the air, sunlight filters through tall pine trees, and cool autumn winds move gently across the hills. Emily enthusiastically films the scenery, speaking to her audience about the beauty of solitude and her excitement about spending a night completely alone in the wilderness. As she hikes deeper into the forest, the nearest campground becomes miles away. Eventually, she finds a secluded clearing surrounded by dense trees and decides it is the perfect location to set up camp. She pitches her tent, gathers firewood, prepares a simple dinner, and records her usual vlog updates. Everything feels peaceful and normal. As evening approaches, the mood subtly begins to change. The sunlight fades earlier than expected behind dark silhouettes of pine trees. Shadows stretch across the forest floor. Emily notices the temperature dropping rapidly, but attributes it to the season. She continues filming and joking with her audience, confident that nothing unusual is happening. After sunset, she sits beside a small campfire. The darkness beyond the firelight feels deeper than she expected. The surrounding trees appear like towering walls. Although she remains calm, she occasionally catches herself staring into the darkness for no clear reason. As the night progresses, Emily notices something strange. The normal sounds of the forest begin disappearing one by one. The chirping insects vanish first. Then the distant calls of birds fade away. Even the rustling of small animals becomes absent. Soon, an unnatural silence settles over the entire forest. The silence feels wrong. Not peaceful, not calm. Wrong. Emily mentions it casually to her camera, trying to laugh it off, but she secretly feels relieved whenever she hears even the slightest sound from the wind. Around midnight, while reviewing footage inside her tent, she hears something outside. A footstep. Soft, slow, deliberate. She freezes and listens. Several seconds later, another footstep follows. The sound seems to come from somewhere beyond the edge of her campsite. Emily exits the tent with her flashlight and camera. She scans the surrounding trees. Nothing is there. The beam illuminates only trunks, fallen leaves, and darkness. After several minutes, she convinces herself it was probably a deer or another harmless animal. She returns to the tent. A few moments later, the footsteps return. This time, they seem closer. The sound moves slowly around the perimeter of the campsite. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Leaves shifting beneath unseen feet. Emily rushes outside again. The footsteps immediately stop. The silence returns. She records the darkness with her camera, but captures nothing unusual. The pattern repeats throughout the night. Whenever Emily hears the footsteps and begins recording, they stop. Whenever she lowers the camera and attempts to relax, they return. The timing becomes so precise that it starts to feel intentional. As the hours pass, exhaustion begins affecting her judgment. Emily starts questioning whether she is actually hearing footsteps at all. She reviews her footage repeatedly but finds no evidence. The microphone captures only faint ambient noise and distant wind. Despite the lack of proof, she becomes increasingly convinced that something or someone is watching her from beyond the trees. Around 2 in the morning, she shines her flashlight toward a cluster of pines and briefly thinks she sees a human figure standing between them. The shape disappears almost instantly. When she checks the area, she finds nothing. No person, no animal, no movement, only empty forest. The uncertainty becomes more frightening than any confirmed threat. Emily's imagination begins filling the gaps. She wonders if a stranger followed her into the forest. She wonders if another camper is playing a cruel prank. She wonders if sleep deprivation is causing auditory hallucinations. None of the explanations feel convincing. Hours drag by. The forest remains silent. The footsteps continue appearing at irregular intervals, always remaining just outside visibility. Emily becomes trapped in a cycle of fear and doubt. Every sound feels significant. Every shadow appears suspicious. Every decision feels wrong. Shortly before dawn, physically and mentally exhausted, she finally falls asleep for less than an hour. When she wakes, pale sunlight filters through the tent fabric. The forest immediately feels different. Birds are singing. The wind moves naturally through the trees. The oppressive atmosphere of the night has vanished. Relieved, Emily exits the tent, expecting to laugh about her fears. Instead, she stops moving. Fresh footprints surround the campsite. A complete circle, then another, and another. The tracks appear to have walked around her tent multiple times during the night. At first, she assumes another hiker approached her camp while she slept. Then she kneels beside one of the prints. Her stomach drops. The tread pattern looks familiar, too familiar. She removes one of her hiking boots and places it beside the footprint. Perfect match. Every groove, every mark, every detail, identical. Emily slowly examines the entire campsite. All of the mysterious tracks appear to have been made by the exact same boots she is wearing. Yet she has no memory of leaving the tent, no memory of walking outside, no memory of circling her own campsite throughout the night. The story ends with Emily packing her equipment in complete silence. Before leaving, she reviews the final footage recorded during the night. The camera shows only darkness, distant trees, and occasional sounds that may or may not be footsteps. As she drives away from Black Hills National Forest, one question continues haunting her. Was someone truly stalking her in the darkness? Did she unknowingly sleepwalk around her own campsite? Or had an isolated night in the silent wilderness slowly convinced her to fear herself? End the story with a deeply unsettling, ambiguous final sentence that leaves the audience questioning what was real and what existed only inside Emily's mind. The hours she couldn't remember, Sarah had built her travel channel around a simple philosophy. Most mysteries had ordinary explanations. While countless creators chased ghost stories and paranormal legends, Sarah preferred facts. She traveled alone to abandoned villages, remote mountains, forgotten roads, and supposedly haunted locations, documenting what she believed were misunderstandings, coincidences, or exaggerations. That mindset was exactly why she traveled to Hoia Baciu Forest. Located near Cluj-Napoca, Romania, the forest had earned an international reputation as one of Europe's most mysterious places. Stories of strange lights, missing time, electronic malfunctions, and unexplained experiences had circulated for decades. Visitors described feelings of anxiety, disorientation, and the sensation of being watched. Sarah considered most of those stories products of suggestion. People arrived expecting something strange. Eventually, their minds gave them exactly what they expected. Standing at the forest entrance during a cool autumn afternoon, she addressed her camera with a confident smile. Tonight, we're spending the entire night here alone. No ghost tours, no guides, just me, the forest, and hopefully some evidence that these stories are more fiction than reality. The forest appeared surprisingly ordinary. Sunlight filtered through tall trees, illuminating patches of moss and fallen leaves. A gentle breeze carried the scent of damp earth. Birds moved among the branches overhead. Nothing felt threatening, nothing felt supernatural. If anything, it seemed peaceful. Sarah followed a narrow trail deeper into the woods, filming continuously as she walked. Every few minutes she stopped to capture scenic shots for her audience. The deeper she traveled, the quieter the outside world became. The sounds of distant roads disappeared. The city vanished behind layers of trees. Eventually, the forest seemed to exist entirely on its own. By late afternoon, she found a small clearing suitable for camping. After setting up her tent, She prepared dinner and reviewed her footage. Everything had gone according to plan. The forest was beautiful, calm, and completely uneventful. Part of her was already anticipating the video's conclusion. Another famous mystery explained away by common sense. As evening settled over the landscape, subtle changes began to emerge. Nothing dramatic, nothing she could immediately identify, just small inconsistencies. While gathering firewood near camp, Sarah noticed a narrow path leading between two clusters of trees. She distinctly remembered passing that trail earlier, or at least she thought she did. Yet from this angle, it appeared to connect to an entirely different section of the forest. The realization bothered her more than she expected. She dismissed it as a simple mistake. After all, every forest contained countless similar-looking trails. Still, the feeling lingered. Later, while recording the sunset, she glanced toward a crooked tree near the edge of camp. Its twisted trunk had stood out to her all afternoon. She looked away briefly to adjust her camera settings. When she looked back, the tree appeared farther away, not much farther, only a few meters, but enough to trigger a strange feeling in her chest. Sarah stared at it for several seconds. The tree hadn't moved, obviously. Trees don't move, yet she couldn't shake the certainty that something about its position was wrong. Darkness arrived quickly. The forest transformed. The familiar scenery vanished beyond the reach of her flashlight. Shadows swallowed every landmark. Distances became impossible to judge. The spaces between trees seemed larger than before. Sarah checked her GPS. No signal. She frowned. That wasn't unusual in remote locations. But several minutes later, the signal returned, then vanished again, then returned, then disappeared completely. The weather remained perfectly clear. No storms, no interference she could identify. The erratic behavior continued throughout the evening. Around midnight, Sarah finally climbed into her tent. The silence felt unusually heavy. She listened to the occasional movement of leaves outside and eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. When she woke, something felt wrong immediately. At first, she couldn't determine why. Then she noticed her backpack. It sat near the tent entrance. Earlier, she had placed it beside her sleeping bag. Her flashlight rested near her feet. She was certain she had left it hanging from a storage loop. Several other items appeared similarly displaced. Not missing, not stolen, simply moved. Sarah exited the tent and inspected the campsite. Nothing indicated another person had been there. No footprints, no disturbed vegetation, no signs of animals. Everything looked normal. Yet her equipment was undeniably different from how she remembered arranging it. She considered the possibility that she had moved things herself before sleeping. Exhaustion could affect memory. The explanation sounded reasonable. Unfortunately, it didn't feel convincing. Unable to return to sleep, she remained awake for the rest of the night. The hours passed slowly. Occasionally she felt as though she had lost track of time. Several minutes would disappear from her awareness. She would glance at her watch and realize far more time had passed than expected. Each occurrence deepened her growing unease. By dawn, she felt mentally exhausted. The arrival of sunlight brought immediate relief. The forest looked normal again, rational again. Sarah began packing camp, eager to leave. Before departing, she decided to review some footage from the previous night. The first clips appeared ordinary, shots of camp, the surrounding trees, her evening commentary. Then she reached recordings she didn't recognize. Sarah frowned. There were additional videos, hours of them, recorded between 2 and 4 in the morning. Videos she had absolutely no memory of filming. Her pulse accelerated. The footage showed her walking through the forest carrying a flashlight. The camera pointed toward various trails, trees, empty clearings, nothing unusual. Yet the recordings continued for nearly 2 hours. She listened to the audio. Her own voice occasionally appeared, soft, monotone, almost distracted, as though she were speaking while half asleep. The most disturbing part wasn't what the footage contained. It was what it didn't contain. No explanation, no context, no indication of why she had left camp, no memory of making the recordings. Watching herself wander through the darkness felt like watching a stranger wearing her face. Back at the campsite, Sarah searched desperately for some explanation. Sleepwalking, extreme fatigue, momentary confusion. Every possibility sounded plausible, yet none accounted for the overwhelming certainty she felt. A certainty that portions of the night had simply vanished. As she prepared to leave, she played the final clip one last time. The video ended with the camera pointed toward a cluster of trees. Nothing moved. Nothing appeared unusual. Then her recorded voice whispered something barely audible, a sentence she could not remember saying, a sentence that sent a chill through her entire body. That's not where they were before. The screen went black. Sarah left Hoia Baciu Forest shortly afterward. The footage was eventually uploaded to her channel. Viewers debated it endlessly. Some believed exhaustion had distorted her memory. Others pointed to the forest's reputation. Many offered their own theories. Sarah never publicly shared her conclusion, because the most frightening part of her experience wasn't the missing hours. It wasn't the malfunctioning GPS. It wasn't even the feeling that the forest had somehow changed around her. The true horror was much simpler. For one entire night, she lost the ability to trust the person she relied on most, herself. And years later, whenever she watches that footage, one question still refuses to leave her mind. If the forest only existed in her memory, how could she be certain her memory was ever telling the truth? The light in the fog. Ethan and Claire had always been drawn to places where most people felt uncomfortable. While their friends preferred crowded campgrounds and well-marked hiking routes, they sought isolation. The further they could get from roads, cell service, and other people, the better. That was exactly what brought them to the Cairngorms National Park in the Scottish Highlands. The region was famous for its vast wilderness, unpredictable weather, and landscapes so empty that a person could walk for hours without seeing another human being. Endless rolling hills stretched beneath enormous skies. Thick forests clung to valleys carved by ancient glaciers. Even on clear days, the land possessed a quiet, lonely beauty. For Ethan and Claire, it was perfect. They arrived during the late afternoon under gray autumn skies. The forecast predicted light fog overnight, but otherwise calm conditions. After studying their maps, they left the main hiking routes and ventured into a remote section of the highlands rarely visited by tourists. The farther they walked, the more isolated they became. Eventually, even the distant trails disappeared behind hills and patches of dense woodland. By sunset, they reached a wide plateau overlooking several valleys. "This is it," Ethan said. Claire looked around. Nothing but open wilderness in every direction. No roads, no buildings, no lights, no signs of civilization. Just endless Scotland. Together, they pitched their tent beside a cluster of weathered rocks that offered some protection from the wind. The evening passed peacefully. They cooked dinner on a small camping stove, watched clouds drift across the darkening sky, and enjoyed the rare feeling of being completely alone. As darkness settled over the highlands, a dense fog began forming. At first, it remained low to the ground. Then it thickened. Slowly, the surrounding hills disappeared. The world beyond their campsite became a shifting wall of gray. Even sounds seemed different. Closer somehow, distorted. The wind no longer moved in predictable directions. It swirled through the landscape, carrying strange echoes from places impossible to identify. By 10 o'clock, visibility had dropped dramatically. Claire zipped herself into her sleeping bag and listened to the weather outside. Something about the fog unsettled her. She couldn't explain why. Perhaps it was the way it erased distance, or the feeling that anything could exist beyond the edge of visibility. Shortly before midnight, she noticed something unusual. A small light, far away on a distant hillside. At first she assumed it belonged to another camper. The light moved slowly through the fog, appearing, disappearing, then appearing again. Claire nudged Ethan awake. "Look." Ethan peered outside. The light flickered weakly in the distance. "Probably another hiker." Claire nodded. The explanation seemed reasonable. Eventually they returned to their sleeping bags. 20 minutes later, Claire checked again. The light remained visible, but something felt wrong. It looked closer. Not dramatically closer. Just enough to make her pause. She stared into the fog. The light moved briefly before stopping. Its motion felt oddly deliberate, almost cautious. Again she woke Ethan. This time he studied it more carefully. It must be coming this direction. "Wouldn't we hear someone walking?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Because she was right. The highlands were quiet, extremely quiet. Any approaching person should have produced some sound. Footsteps, equipment, voices, something. Yet the landscape remained completely silent. Over the next hour, the light continued appearing closer each time they checked, always visible through the fog, always silent, never revealing who carried it. The uncertainty slowly transformed curiosity into anxiety. Around 1 in the morning, another sound emerged. A voice, faint, barely audible. Claire sat upright instantly. "Did you hear that?" Ethan froze. He had heard it too. Someone was speaking somewhere beyond the fog. The words themselves were impossible to understand. Only the rhythm of conversation reached them. Two people talking quietly. The sound drifted in and out with the wind. For several minutes they listened. Then Claire's expression changed. "That sounds like us." Ethan frowned. "What?" "The voices." She swallowed. "They sound like us." At first the idea seemed ridiculous. Then Ethan listened more carefully. The realization sent a chill through his body. The distant voices did resemble theirs. Not perfectly, but enough to be deeply unsettling. The conversation continued intermittently. Fragments carried through the fog, occasional words, broken sentences. The sound of a man and woman speaking somewhere in the darkness. Neither could fully understand what was being said, until one sentence reached them clearly. Claire's face went pale, because she recognized the words immediately. She hadn't heard them before, yet somehow she knew she would. 30 minutes later, she spoke that exact sentence during an argument with Ethan. Word for word. The realization terrified both of them. Neither could explain it. Neither wanted to discuss it. But after that moment, they began paying close attention, and the pattern continued. The voices outside seemed to discuss events before they happened. Small conversations, future disagreements, future observations, future decisions. Each one occurred exactly as they had heard it. The fog outside grew thicker. The mysterious light continued its silent approach, and the voices became increasingly difficult to ignore. Sleep was impossible. Fear evolved into paranoia. Every comment between them carried new weight. Every decision felt predetermined. Claire became convinced someone was watching them. Ethan insisted exhaustion was affecting their judgment. Yet even as he argued for rational explanations, he no longer sounded convinced himself. Hours passed. Neither left the tent. Neither wanted to discover who or what might be carrying the light. By 3 in the morning, the glow seemed impossibly close. Somewhere just beyond the fog, perhaps 50 feet away, perhaps less. Yet no footsteps ever accompanied it. No silhouette emerged, only the silent presence of illumination moving through the darkness. Then came the final conversation. The voices outside sounded clearer than before. For nearly 30 seconds, Ethan and Claire listened. Neither spoke, neither moved. The distant versions of themselves discussed something terrifyingly specific. They described opening the tent, stepping outside, and seeing what carried the light. The conversation ended abruptly. Silence returned. Claire slowly turned toward Ethan. Ethan stared back. Neither needed to say anything. Both had heard the same thing, and neither intended to follow those instructions. The remaining hours crawled by. The light never entered the campsite. The voices never returned. Eventually, the eastern horizon began to brighten. Dawn arrived slowly across the highlands. As sunlight spread through the fog, visibility improved. The oppressive atmosphere weakened. Birds returned. Wind resumed its familiar patterns. The nightmare of the night seemed to dissolve with the darkness. Finally, gathering their courage, Ethan and Claire stepped outside. The fog had almost completely cleared. The distant hills became visible once more. There was no light, no sign of another camper. No evidence anyone had ever been nearby. Relieved, they packed their equipment and prepared to leave. Then Claire noticed something beside the tent. A set of footprints, fresh, leading out of the fog, stopping only a few feet from where they had slept. The tracks remained there for several seconds before continuing away into the mist. Ethan examined them carefully. His stomach tightened. The footprints weren't mysterious because of where they came from. They were mysterious because of where they led. There was only one set, no approach, no origin, just footprints beginning suddenly beside their campsite and disappearing into nothing. Years later, neither Ethan nor Claire fully agreed on what happened that night. They considered every explanation: sleep deprivation, environmental stress, shared hallucinations, the effects of isolation. Each possibility sounded reasonable, yet one detail remained impossible to forget. As they drove away from the Cairngorms that morning, Claire checked the voice recorder on her phone. Hidden among hours of wind noise was a brief recording captured shortly before dawn. A conversation, two voices, Ethan's voice, discussing events that would occur later that day, and at the very end of the recording, one final sentence neither of them ever remembered saying, a sentence spoken in both of their voices simultaneously. We should never have looked at the light. Neither of them remembered hearing those words in the tent, yet both knew one thing with absolute certainty. The recording had been made before sunrise, and neither of them had been awake when it happened.